Welcome to Chosen by Love, where fate brings hearts together in the most unexpected ways. Subscribe and join our growing family of story lovers. Tell us where you're watching from, and let's begin today's journey. Sometimes the person who listens to your worst day is the one who changes your entire life. The late afternoon sun painted long golden shadows across Riverside Park as office workers drifted toward the subway, their conversations blending into the distant hum of traffic and the soft rustle of leaves dancing in the warm September breeze. Elise Whitmore barely noticed any of it. Her shoulders sagged beneath the weight of a canvas work bag stuffed with reports she had promised herself she would finish over the weekend, and her navy blazer felt tighter than it had that morning after another endless day of swallowing frustration. She walked past joggers, families, and couples sharing ice cream before finally collapsing onto an old wooden bench overlooking the lake. She let out a slow breath she felt like she had been holding for months. "What a disaster," she whispered to herself, rubbing her tired eyes. A few feet away, another person occupied the far end of the same bench. He wore a charcoal jacket over a simple gray sweater, dark jeans, and comfortable sneakers. Nothing about him suggested unimaginable wealth. He held a small paper cup of coffee in one hand while lazily tossing tiny crumbs from a muffin toward a flock of sparrows gathering near the water. He glanced toward Elise only briefly before returning his attention to the birds, giving her the quiet privacy people rarely offered strangers anymore. That simple courtesy somehow made the silence feel safe. Elise laughed softly at herself. "Sorry," she muttered. "Long day." The man answered with an easy smile. "Those usually deserve coffee." She looked down at the empty space beside her. "I skipped mine around 10 this morning." He nodded as though he understood exactly what that felt like. "Rough office." She hesitated. Her mother had always warned her not to overshare with strangers, yet something about this man felt disarmingly ordinary. He wasn't staring at his phone. He wasn't pretending to be interested. He simply listened. "You ever work somewhere that makes you question yourself every single day?" she asked. "Sometimes," he replied calmly. "What happened?" Elise leaned back and stared across the lake where sunlight shimmered on the water. "I love the work. At least I used to. I spent years building a career as a marketing strategist, and I worked hard to earn my position. I stay late, I volunteer for projects nobody wants, and somehow I'm still invisible." The man remained quiet. She continued before she could stop herself. "My manager takes credit for everything my team does. Every presentation, every campaign, every late night." She laughed without humor. "Yesterday he introduced one of my ideas as his own." "Did anyone know it was yours?" the stranger asked. "A few coworkers. Nobody said anything." She shrugged. "People have bills to pay." A cool breeze stirred the loose strands of her light brown hair across her face. She tucked them behind one ear and smiled bitterly. "Maybe that's just how corporate America works." The stranger studied the ripples moving across the lake before speaking again. "Do you think your company's leadership knows what's happening?" Elise almost laughed out loud. "Leadership?" She shook her head. "Please. The executives probably don't even know my floor exists." She hugged her bag closer. "And don't get me started on the CEO." The man raised an eyebrow ever so slightly. "Not a fan." "I've never even met him," Elise admitted. "I've only seen him in those polished company videos talking about culture and people coming first." She rolled her eyes playfully. "Maybe he's a great guy. Maybe not. But if he really cared, people like my manager wouldn't keep getting away with treating employees like they're disposable." The stranger looked down into his coffee before quietly asking, "So if you had 5 minutes with your billionaire boss, what would you tell him?" Elise smiled for the first time all day. Honestly. She inhaled deeply. "I'd tell him to stop reading reports and start talking to the people actually doing the work. I'd tell him that numbers don't tell you who's staying until 9 every night or who's crying in the restroom because they think they're failing when they're actually carrying an entire department." She laughed softly again. "Wow, I really sound dramatic." "No," the man replied gently. "You sound honest." His answer caught her off guard. Most people rush to offer advice. He simply acknowledged how she felt. Somehow that meant more. The lake grew quieter as the sun slipped lower behind the skyline. Elise checked the time on her phone and sighed. I should go before I start complaining about my boss all over again. She stood, adjusting the strap on her bag. Thanks for listening. You're surprisingly easy to talk to. The man rose as well, slipping his empty coffee cup into a nearby recycling bin. Sometimes people don't need solutions, he said with a warm smile. Sometimes they just need someone willing to hear the truth. Elise smiled back. Well, whoever you are, I hope your weekend is a lot better than mine. I hope yours turns out better than you expect. She gave a small wave before walking toward the subway entrance, never once looking back. The man watched her disappear into the evening crowd, his thoughtful expression lingering far longer than a casual conversation should have deserved. Only after she was gone did his phone vibrate. The screen displayed a message from his executive assistant. Monday's board meeting is confirmed, Mr. Mercer. Every department head will be present at 8 a.m. Declan Mercer slipped the phone back into his pocket and glanced once more toward the path where Elise had disappeared. Monday morning arrived far too quickly, and Elise Whitmore stepped into the gleaming lobby of Mercer Dynamics with the same quiet determination she carried every day, even when she felt exhausted. The marble floors reflected the sunlight pouring through the towering glass walls, and employees hurried toward the elevators with coffee cups in one hand and laptops in the other. Normally, the atmosphere buzzed with routine conversations about meetings and deadlines, but this morning something felt different. People were whispering. Department managers adjusted their jackets. Executive assistants rushed across the lobby with tablets clutched against their chests. Elise glanced at her friend Rachel from accounting. What is going on? Rachel lowered her voice. The chief executive officer is here. Elise blinked. Here? Today. Rachel nodded quickly. Apparently he got back from Europe over the weekend. No one expected him to come into the office until next week. Elise felt a knot tighten in her stomach. As a senior marketing strategist, Elise rarely had any reason to interact with the executive floor. She had never seen Declan Mercer in person. Like most employees, she only knew him through company newsletters, annual shareholder meetings streamed online, and carefully produced videos about leadership and innovation. She pressed the elevator button, hoping to disappear into another ordinary workday before anything unusual happened. The elevator doors opened, but before anyone stepped inside, the lobby suddenly became completely silent. Every conversation stopped at once. Elise turned instinctively toward the entrance. A small group walked through the revolving doors. Security remained discreetly behind them, while several executives hurried forward to greet the man leading the group. He wore a tailored navy suit now instead of the casual jacket from Saturday afternoon. His confident stride was unmistakable. Elise felt every breath leave her lungs. Could not be him. Her heart pounded as the realization crashed over her all at once. The stranger from the park. The man who had quietly listened while she complained about her job. The person she had joked was easier to talk to than her billionaire boss. He was her billionaire boss. Declan Mercer acknowledged the executives with a polite nod before his eyes briefly swept across the lobby. For the smallest fraction of a second, his gaze met Elise's. She froze. Surely he recognized her. Surely he remembered every word she had said beside the lake. She expected surprise. She expected disappointment. She even expected anger. Instead, his expression remained calm and professional, as though they had never met before in their lives. He continued walking toward the private executive elevators without slowing down. Elise stared after him, unable to process what had just happened. Rachel nudged her shoulder. Can you believe it? I have never actually seen him this close. Elise forced a weak smile. Neither have I. The words felt strange leaving her mouth. Throughout the morning, she struggled to concentrate. Every email seemed to blur together. Every notification pulled her thoughts back to the same impossible question. Why had he hidden who he was? Had he recognized her immediately at the park? Had he been testing her? Around 10 o'clock, her manager, Victor Harlan, marched into the marketing department carrying a stack of folders. Conference room 4 in 15 minutes, he announced. The executive team wants updates on the fall campaign, and I expect everyone to look prepared. Elise quietly gathered her notes. The presentation she had spent nearly 2 weeks perfecting rested inside a blue folder on her desk. She had stayed until almost 9 o'clock on Thursday evening refining every detail. As everyone entered the conference room, Victor stepped confidently to the front. Without acknowledging Elise, he opened the blue folder she had created and began presenting every idea as though he had developed the campaign himself. Elise lowered her eyes. Nobody challenged him. Nobody corrected the record. She had become painfully familiar with that silence. Halfway through the presentation, the conference room door opened. Every person immediately stood. Declan Mercer entered with 2 senior executives and quietly took a seat near the end of the table. He said nothing. He simply listened. Elise kept her attention fixed on her notebook, praying he would not remember her face. But as Victor enthusiastically claimed ownership of another strategy that Elise herself had written, Declan's eyes shifted toward her for just a moment. He noticed she did not speak. He noticed she did not interrupt. He noticed the disappointment she tried so carefully to hide. Then, almost imperceptibly, he glanced at the handwritten notes in front of her and back toward the polished presentation Victor continued to claim as his own. Declan did not expose anyone. He did not ask difficult questions. He simply observed every detail in complete silence, and for the first time since their conversation beside the lake, Elise realized the stranger who had listened so patiently had not forgotten a single word. The meeting ended without a single dramatic moment, yet it stayed with Declan Mercer long after everyone else returned to their departments. From the floor-to-ceiling windows of his executive office overlooking Manhattan, he replayed every detail in his mind. Victor Harlan had delivered a polished presentation with complete confidence, but confidence alone had never impressed Declan. During years of building Mercer Dynamics, he had learned that the loudest voice in a room was rarely the one doing the most meaningful work. What caught his attention was not Victor's presentation. It was Elise Whitmore's silence. She had not interrupted. She had not rolled her eyes. She had not tried to expose her manager in front of executives. Instead, she quietly wrote notes in the margin of her notebook while Victor presented ideas she clearly recognized before anyone else did. Most people seeking recognition eventually demanded it. Elise had done the opposite. She simply kept working. That afternoon, Declan asked his executive assistant, Natalie Brooks, to bring him several personnel files. Natalie entered carrying a tablet. "Which department would you like to review?" she asked. "Marketing," Declan answered. "Specifically Victor Harlan's team." Natalie looked mildly surprised but asked no questions. Within minutes she returned with digital performance reports, project summaries, and employee evaluations. Declan spent nearly an hour reading through them. Victor consistently received outstanding leadership scores. Elise's reviews described her as dependable, collaborative, and technically strong, yet her accomplishments seemed unusually vague compared to the impressive campaign results attached to Victor's name. Something did not fit. Numbers told one story, but the people behind those numbers often told another. Instead of requesting another report, Declan made an unusual decision. He canceled 2 non-essential meetings for the week and quietly scheduled visits to several departments without public announcements. He wanted to observe daily operations himself. On Tuesday morning he walked through the marketing floor accompanied only by Natalie. Employees immediately became nervous. Conversations stopped. Computer screens filled with spreadsheets as everyone suddenly looked busy. Declan greeted people with a friendly smile, asking simple questions about ongoing projects. When he reached Elise's desk, she stood politely. "Good morning, Mr. Mercer." "Good morning, Miss Whitmore." His tone remained perfectly professional. "How long have you been with the company?" "Almost 3 years." "Do you enjoy the work?" She hesitated for the briefest moment before answering carefully. "I enjoy creating solutions for our clients." Declan noticed she had answered a different question than the one he asked. He smiled politely and continued to the next workstation. As he walked away, he caught sight of a handwritten notebook lying beside Elise's keyboard. It was filled with campaign sketches, audience research, color palettes, and handwritten revisions far more detailed than the presentation Victor had claimed as his own. Later that afternoon, Declan happened to pass the employee break room while waiting for another meeting to begin. Inside, several co-workers gathered around the coffee machine discussing an unexpected software issue delaying a client launch. Before anyone could assign blame, Elise offered to stay late and restore the missing files from the company's secure backup system. "You stayed late yesterday," one coworker said. Elise glanced at the clock. "I'll restore the files, but I'll need someone from IT to verify them before we relaunch. We can't risk making the problem worse." Nobody applauded her. Nobody wrote down her contribution. Everyone simply accepted her offer because they had apparently grown accustomed to her generosity. Declan continued walking without interrupting. The following afternoon, Natalie brought him a preliminary operational summary prepared by internal audit. The report included building access patterns collected as part of a broader review of departmental workloads. One detail immediately stood out. Elise's badge regularly recorded departures between 8:30 and 9:15 at night, while most members of her department left shortly after 6. Victor's records, by contrast, showed that he usually left before the rest of the team. Declan closed the report and looked at Natalie. "Make sure this review stays focused on departmental practices," he said. "I don't want anyone singled out without proper cause." "Understood," Natalie replied. Audit is comparing patterns across the entire department, not tracking any one employee. Declan leaned back in his chair, thinking about the conversation beside the lake. She had never exaggerated. If anything, she had understated everything. On Thursday morning, another opportunity presented itself. A newly hired marketing assistant accidentally sent an incomplete report to an important client and looked ready to burst into tears. Before the supervisor could react, Elise gently pulled the young employee aside. "Everybody makes mistakes," she said with a reassuring smile. "Let us fix it together before anyone panics." For nearly an hour she patiently explained the correction process without embarrassment or criticism. The nervous assistant eventually laughed in relief. Declan watched the entire interaction through the conference room glass across the hallway. Leadership could not always be measured by titles, salaries, or corner offices. Sometimes it appeared in the quiet moments when nobody important seemed to be watching. As he returned to his office that evening, one thought refused to leave his mind. The woman who believed she was invisible had become the one employee he noticed more than anyone else. By the end of the week, Declan Mercer no longer believed he was looking at an isolated misunderstanding. Too many small details connected in ways that could not be ignored. Every major campaign credited to Victor Harlan contained supporting files created by Elise Whitmore. Timestamps showed she had drafted proposals days before they appeared under Victor's name. Email chains revealed that clients frequently responded directly to her recommendations before Victor stepped in to deliver polished summaries during executive meetings. None of it proved intentional misconduct on its own, but together it painted a picture that made Declan deeply uncomfortable. He called Natalie Brooks into his office early Friday morning. "I want a confidential review of every major marketing project from the last 18 months, he said. Natalie nodded. "Should human resources be involved?" Declan shook his head. "Not yet. I do not want rumors spreading before we understand the full story. Limit access to you, legal counsel, and internal audit." Natalie studied him for a moment. "Is there a specific concern?" Declan looked toward the skyline outside his office window. "I think we may have talented people carrying far more weight than anyone realizes." While the review quietly began behind the scenes, life on the marketing floor continued exactly as it always had. Elise arrived before 8 every morning with a reusable coffee mug and a notebook filled with fresh ideas. She organized meetings, answered client questions, corrected presentation slides, and volunteered whenever another department needed help. Yet every afternoon Victor seemed to find another reason to remind everyone who was in charge. "I will handle the executive briefing," he announced after one planning session. "Elise, send me your draft and I will clean it up before leadership sees it." She simply nodded. "Of course." One coworker waited until Victor left before whispering, "You know he is going to put his name on it again." Elise gave a tired smile. "The client matters more than my pride." "But does nobody ever notice?" another teammate asked. Elise closed her notebook. "Maybe someday. Until then, I would rather spend my energy doing good work than arguing over credit." Unbeknownst to everyone in the room, those words reached Declan later that afternoon through a different source. Internal audit had interviewed several employees separately as part of what they described as a routine operational review. Without coordinating their answers, multiple people repeated the same pattern. Elise generated ideas. Elise solved emergencies. Elise trained new hires. Victor received recognition. None of the employees sounded angry. They sounded resigned, as though the situation had existed for so long that it had become normal. That realization troubled Declan more than anything else. A healthy workplace should never teach good people to expect unfairness. Later that evening, long after most lights in the building had been turned off, Declan walked through the nearly empty office on his way out. The marketing department remained illuminated by a single desk lamp. Elise sat alone reviewing printed campaign reports with colored sticky notes spread across her desk. She did not notice him at first. Instead, she quietly organized a folder labeled with Victor's name before placing another folder, much thicker and filled with handwritten research, into her own drawer. Declan paused outside the glass wall without interrupting. He watched as she answered an email from a client thanking the entire team for an innovative strategy. Her reply contained no mention of her own contribution. Instead, she wrote that she appreciated working alongside such dedicated colleagues. There was no bitterness in her words, only professionalism. As he continued toward the elevator, he remembered something she had said beside the lake. She had wished her company leaders would spend less time reading reports and more time listening to the people doing the work. At the time, those words had sounded like frustration. Now they felt like a challenge. Declan realized he had built a successful company with systems designed to measure performance. Yet those same systems had failed to reveal the truth unfolding just a few floors beneath his own office. He stepped into the elevator with a quiet sense of responsibility. Discovering the problem was only the beginning. If he truly believed leadership meant serving the people behind the numbers, then he could not allow quiet integrity to remain invisible any longer. The following Monday began with an unexpected email that appeared in the inboxes of several employees across Mercer Dynamics. Subject line: Executive Innovation Working Session. Elise read the message twice before she believed it. She had been selected to participate in a small cross-department strategy meeting led personally by Declan Mercer. Her first reaction was not excitement. It was panic. She immediately wondered whether he remembered every word from their conversation in the park. Rachel leaned over the divider between their desks. Congratulations. Do you know how many people would love to get invited to one of those sessions? Elise forced a smile. I am not even sure why I was invited. Maybe someone finally noticed your work. Elise wanted to believe that, but she had spent too many years watching recognition flow in someone else's direction. When the meeting began, only 8 employees sat around the large conference table. They represented different departments and different levels of seniority. Declan entered without an entourage, carrying nothing more than a notebook and a cup of black coffee. Thank you all for coming, he said warmly. Today is not about presentations. It is about conversations. I want to hear ideas from the people closest to the work. The atmosphere immediately felt different from most executive meetings. Instead of speaking first, Declan listened. He asked thoughtful questions, encouraged quieter employees to share their opinions, and never interrupted anyone. When it was Elise's turn, she hesitated. Old habits reminded her to keep her comments brief. Miss Whitmore, Declan said with an encouraging smile, take your time. She slowly opened her notebook. I think our clients respond best when they feel understood before they are sold to. We spend a great deal of time talking about products, but sometimes we forget to tell stories about the people those products help. Several people around the table nodded. Declan asked another question. If you had complete freedom, what would you change first? Elise looked down for a moment before answering. I would create smaller client feedback groups before every major campaign. We collect data very well, but we could probably listen better. Declan smiled almost imperceptibly. The sentence reminded him of another conversation beside a quiet lake. Interesting, he replied. Please continue. By the end of the session, her confidence had grown noticeably. She explained ideas clearly, answered difficult questions without defensiveness, and openly gave credit to teammates whenever their suggestions improved her own. As everyone gathered their notebooks to leave, Declan stopped her politely. "Miss Whitmore, would you mind staying for just a minute?" Her heart skipped. Once the room emptied, she stood quietly beside the conference table. "Am I in trouble?" she asked with an awkward laugh. Declan looked genuinely surprised. "Why would you think that?" She hesitated before answering. "Most employees only hear from the chief executive officer when something has gone wrong." He smiled. "Then perhaps we should change that tradition." The tension in her shoulders eased slightly. He thanked her for her thoughtful contributions and asked if she would be willing to join another innovation session the following week. She agreed, still wondering why he seemed so interested in hearing her perspective. Over the next several weeks, similar opportunities appeared. Sometimes they discussed customer experience. Sometimes they reviewed new ideas for employee development. Occasionally, their conversations drifted beyond business. Declan discovered that Elise volunteered at a neighborhood literacy program on Saturday mornings because she believed every child deserved the confidence that came from reading well. Elise learned that Declan enjoyed walking through city parks whenever he needed to think, because quiet places helped him make better decisions. Neither of them mentioned the afternoon they had first met there. The unspoken memory lingered comfortably between them, like a familiar song neither person needed to identify aloud. Around the office, co-workers began noticing subtle changes. Declan greeted employees by name more often. He spent less time behind closed executive doors and more time visiting different departments. Suggestions that had once disappeared into anonymous online forums suddenly received thoughtful responses. People quietly commented that the company felt different. They could not explain exactly why, but leadership somehow seemed closer than before. Elise noticed the change too. For the first time since joining Mercer Dynamics, she began looking forward to Mondays instead of counting the hours until Friday. She still had no idea that the quiet conversation she had shared with a stranger on a park bench had started changing not only one man's heart, but the culture of an entire company. Nearly 2 months after that quiet afternoon in the park, Mercer Dynamics gathered for its quarterly company meeting in the largest auditorium inside the headquarters. More than 300 employees filled the seats while others joined through live video from regional offices across the country. Conversations echoed through the room as people wondered why the meeting had been scheduled with so little notice. Elise Whitmore found a seat beside Rachel near the middle of the auditorium, balancing a notebook on her lap out of habit. Victor Harlan sat several rows closer to the stage, smiling confidently as he chatted with other department managers. The lights dimmed and Declan Mercer walked onto the stage to warm applause. He thanked everyone for another successful quarter before speaking about innovation, teamwork, and the responsibility every leader carried toward the people they served. His tone remained calm, but those who worked closely with him noticed an unusual seriousness beneath his words. "During the past several weeks," he said, "I asked our internal audit and leadership team to conduct a comprehensive review of how ideas move through our organization, how employees receive recognition, and whether our values are reflected in our daily actions." A quiet murmur spread across the audience. Declan continued, "Mercer Dynamics was built on trust. Trust cannot exist if contributions are overlooked, or if leadership fails to recognize the people creating real value." Elise felt her stomach tighten. She had no idea where the conversation was heading. On the large screen behind Declan, a series of charts appeared showing project timelines, collaboration records, and internal workflow improvements that would soon be implemented across every department. Then his expression softened. The review also uncovered situations where credit for important work was not consistently assigned to the people who earned it. The auditorium became completely silent. Victor shifted slightly in his seat. Declan never raised his voice. Effective immediately, Mercer Dynamics is introducing a transparent project attribution system, so every employee receives proper recognition for documented contributions. We are also making leadership changes in areas where our standards have not been met. Declan paused before continuing. Effective today, Victor Harlan has left Mercer Dynamics. Interim leadership for the marketing department will be announced shortly. A low murmur moved through the auditorium. Elise glanced toward the rows near the stage, but Victor's seat was empty. Earlier that morning, Human Resources and Legal Counsel had met with him privately. His access to company systems had been suspended, his responsibilities had been reassigned, and he had left the building before the town hall began. Declan waited for the room to settle. I won't discuss the details of an individual personnel matter. What I can tell you is that our review identified serious failures in how work was credited and how employees were managed. Those failures are being addressed. This isn't about publicly punishing one person. It's about accountability and building a culture where integrity matters as much as results. Then he smiled faintly, as though remembering something personal. Several weeks ago, someone told me something that I have not been able to forget. Elise looked up instinctively. That person believed leadership spent too much time reading reports and not enough time listening to the people doing the work. A gentle ripple of laughter moved through the audience. Declan continued. The truth is, that person was right. Elise's heart nearly stopped. She knew those words. She had spoken them on a quiet park bench to a man she believed was an ordinary stranger. Declan's eyes moved across the audience until they rested on her. He did not embarrass her by saying her name or revealing their private conversation. Instead, he offered a grateful smile that only she fully understood. Sometimes, he said, the most valuable feedback does not come from formal surveys or executive reports. Sometimes it comes from honest conversations with people who simply want this company to become better. Elise lowered her eyes, feeling both humbled and overwhelmed. For the first time since joining Mercer Dynamics, she realized her voice had mattered all along. After the meeting ended, employees lingered throughout the auditorium discussing the unexpected announcements. Many expressed hope that the company was entering a new chapter. Others quietly thanked teammates whose work had often gone unnoticed. Rachel hugged Elise's arm with excitement. Can you believe all of this? She whispered. Elise smiled softly, still trying to process everything. Across the room, Declan exchanged a few words with senior executives before glancing toward Elise once more. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic declaration, only a look of quiet understanding that carried them back to the peaceful afternoon when honesty had begun changing both of their lives without either of them realizing where that single conversation would eventually lead. The days following the company meeting felt surprisingly lighter for everyone on the marketing floor. But no one experienced the change more deeply than Elise Whitmore. For the first time since joining Mercer Dynamics, she no longer felt invisible. The new project attribution system immediately began documenting contributions from every employee. And within a week, several campaigns officially reflected work she had quietly completed months earlier. Co-workers congratulated her with genuine smiles, and although she appreciated every kind word, she still found the attention slightly uncomfortable. She had never worked hard for applause. She had simply wanted fairness. Late one afternoon, an email from Declan Mercer's office appeared in her inbox requesting a brief meeting. Her pulse quickened the moment she saw his name. She wondered if this was finally the conversation she had been expecting since the day she recognized him in the company lobby. When she entered his office, sunlight poured through the windows overlooking the city, casting long golden reflections across the polished floor. Declan stood beside the coffee table instead of behind his desk, making the enormous office feel unexpectedly welcoming. Thank you for coming, Miss Whitmore, he said. Please have a seat. Elise smiled nervously. I still feel strange sitting in the chief executive officer's office. Declan laughed softly. I remember someone once telling me I was easier to talk to on a park bench. Elise covered her face for a second with both hands before laughing in embarrassment. I knew this conversation was coming eventually. I owe you an apology, Declan said sincerely. She looked up surprised. An apology? He nodded. You trusted a stranger enough to speak honestly. I already knew who I was, but you did not. Looking back, perhaps I should have introduced myself. Elise thought quietly before answering. Maybe. But if you had, I never would have said what I really thought. Declan smiled. Exactly. A comfortable silence settled between them. Finally, Elise took a deep breath. I should probably apologize too. For what? For saying you were disconnected from your employees. Declan gently shook his head. Do you remember what I said during the company meeting? She nodded. I remember every word. Then you also remember that you were not wrong. His honesty caught her completely off guard. Leadership is not about pretending to have every answer, he continued. It is about being willing to admit when someone else sees something you missed. Elise studied him carefully. The polished executive standing before shareholders was the same thoughtful man who had quietly listened beside a lake without interrupting her once. "You changed the company," she said quietly. Declan smiled. "No. You helped me realize it needed to change." He walked toward the window before continuing. "When I founded Mercer Dynamics, I promised myself I would never become the kind of leader who forgot what it felt like to be an employee. Somewhere along the way, reports became easier to read than conversations." Elise joined him near the window. "You fixed it." "I started fixing it," he corrected gently. "That work never really ends." She smiled. "I suppose that is true." Before she left, Declan handed her a small notebook with the Mercer Dynamics logo embossed on the cover. "What is this?" she asked. "An invitation." She looked confused. "I want you to write down every idea you think could improve this company. No filters. No worrying about titles or hierarchy. If something can make Mercer Dynamics better, I want to hear it." Elise held the notebook carefully, remembering another notebook filled with campaign ideas that had once remained hidden inside her desk drawer. "Are you sure?" "Very sure." She smiled warmly. "Then I already have several pages in mind." Over the following weeks, their conversations became more frequent, but never inappropriate. Sometimes they discussed employee mentorship. Sometimes community outreach projects. Sometimes they simply shared coffee after long meetings while talking about books, favorite parks, and childhood memories. The distance between chief executive officer and employee slowly gave way to something much simpler. Two people who respected one another. Two people who had discovered that honesty could begin with an ordinary conversation between strangers. Neither of them spoke about what the future might hold, yet every meeting ended with both quietly hoping the next conversation would come sooner rather than later. As winter approached, Mercer Dynamics continued evolving into the company Declan Mercer had always hoped it could become. Employee satisfaction reached its highest level in years, collaboration improved across departments, and clients noticed the difference in the energy behind every project. Yet with every positive change came new conversations inside the boardroom. Several directors privately expressed concern that the chief executive officer seemed to be spending an unusual amount of time with one employee from the marketing department. No one questioned Elise Whitmore's talent or integrity, but they worried about appearances. During one executive meeting, a board member spoke carefully. "Declan, your leadership has strengthened this company tremendously. However, people may misunderstand your professional relationship with Miss Whitmore. We should protect both the organization and her reputation." Declan listened without interrupting. After a thoughtful pause, he replied, "I agree that her reputation deserves protection. That is precisely why every opportunity she receives must be based on documented performance rather than my opinion." Instead of avoiding the issue, he proposed a transparent solution. Human Resources partnered with outside leadership consultants to conduct an independent evaluation for several high-performing employees across different departments. Every candidate completed the same assessments, submitted the same project portfolios, and participated in the same interview process. Declan deliberately removed himself from every stage of the evaluation. He also asked the board's ethics committee and general counsel to review the reporting structure surrounding the new position. They agreed that whoever received the role would report to the president of strategy, not to Declan, and that all decisions involving compensation, performance reviews, and future promotions would remain outside the CEO's direct authority. Declan signed a formal recusal acknowledging that he would have no role in evaluating Elise if she became the successful candidate. Weeks passed before the final recommendations arrived. Elise knew nothing about the conversations taking place behind executive doors. She simply continued doing what she had always done. She mentored new employees, volunteered for difficult assignments, and filled the notebook Declan had given her with practical ideas for improving communication throughout the company. One afternoon, she received an invitation to meet with Human Resources. As she walked down the hallway, old memories resurfaced. There had been a time when unexpected meetings filled her with anxiety. This time she took a deep breath and reminded herself that whatever happened, she had stayed true to who she was. Inside the conference room, the Vice President of Human Resources greeted her with a warm smile. "Elise, congratulations. The independent panel has selected you as our new Strategy and Client Experience Director. The role reports to Amanda Reeves, our President of Strategy. Your compensation, evaluations, and promotion decisions will be handled through her division and reviewed by Human Resources. Elise blinked in surprise. I do not understand. The executive slid a folder across the table. Your evaluation received the highest combined score among every candidate. Your leadership, collaboration, innovation, and peer recommendations consistently stood out. Elise slowly opened the folder and recognized none of the evaluators' names. Everything had been conducted independently. Tears gathered in her eyes, not from sadness but from relief. For years she had wondered whether anyone truly saw her work. Now the recognition came through a process no one could question. Later that afternoon, she knocked gently on Declan's office door. "May I come in?" "Of course." She stepped inside holding the promotion letter. "Did you know?" Declan smiled honestly. "I knew the evaluation was happening. I did not know the final results until this morning." She laughed softly. "Then I suppose I earned this." "You absolutely did." He stood and offered his hand. "Congratulations, Miss Whitmore." She shook it, but neither of them let go immediately. They both smiled at the quiet irony of the moment. Months earlier, she had believed her career might never move forward. Now she had reached a new chapter entirely because fairness had finally replaced assumptions. As they released hands, Declan spoke gently. "Thank you for trusting this company enough to stay, when leaving would have been easier." Elise looked at the notebook resting on the corner of his desk. "Thank you for proving that good leaders can still change." Before leaving, she paused at the doorway. "Do you remember something you once told me?" Declan tilted his head. "Which conversation?" She smiled knowingly. "The one where you said people sometimes only need someone willing to hear the truth." He smiled back. "I remember." Elise nodded. "I think both of us needed someone willing to listen." As she walked back through the office, coworkers congratulated her with genuine excitement. There was no resentment because everyone understood exactly how the decision had been made. Transparency had protected not only the company but also the trust between its people. Watching from his office window, Declan realized that the strongest relationships were never built on privilege. They were built on respect earned one honest conversation, one fair decision, and one quiet act of integrity at a time. Nearly 1 year after a tired young employee sat beside a stranger on a quiet park bench believing no one important would ever hear her voice, Mercer Dynamics celebrated its most successful year in company history. Revenue had grown, employee retention had reached a record high, and the company's reputation for fairness attracted talented people from across the country. Business magazines praised the new leadership culture, but inside the headquarters the greatest source of pride could not be measured by financial reports. People trusted one another again. Every idea carried the name of the person who created it. Every employee knew that integrity mattered. Elise Whitmore walked through the lobby one Friday evening after finishing another strategy session, smiling as she watched younger employees laughing together near the coffee bar. She remembered how different the building had once felt. The atmosphere that had once filled her with quiet disappointment now welcomed people with hope. As she stepped outside, she noticed a familiar figure standing near the entrance instead of waiting beside a company car. Declan Mercer smiled the moment he saw her. "Do you have a few minutes?" he asked. She laughed softly. "You know, every important conversation in my life seems to begin with that question. Then perhaps we should continue the tradition." They walked several blocks without discussing work. The winter air felt crisp, and the city lights reflected across the river exactly as they had on the afternoon they first met. Eventually they reached the same park where everything had begun. The same wooden bench still overlooked the quiet water. The transition of Elisa's role had been completed 3 months earlier. She now worked within an independently managed division, and Declan had no authority over her salary, evaluations, or future advancement. Both Human Resources and the board's Ethics Committee had documented the arrangement. Declan paused beside it before turning toward Elise. "Do you remember what you said the first day we met?" She smiled. "Unfortunately, yes. I remember telling a complete stranger that my billionaire chief executive officer probably never listened to employees." Declan laughed warmly. And you changed that chief executive officer forever. Elise gently shook her head. You changed because you wanted to. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and removed a small notebook with a familiar blue cover. It was the very first notebook he had given her months earlier. Its pages were now completely filled. You returned this to my office yesterday, he said. I read every page. Elise looked at the notebook fondly. I finally ran out of room. You did more than fill a notebook, Declan replied quietly. You helped build a better company. You reminded me what leadership should look like. You challenged me without knowing who I was, and you treated me with the same honesty you would have offered anyone else. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt peaceful rather than uncertain. Finally, Declan took one careful step closer. There is something I have wanted to say for a long time. I waited because I never wanted you to wonder whether your career depended on how you felt about me. Your role is now outside my reporting authority, and I've formally removed myself from every decision involving your compensation, evaluation, or advancement. You don't owe me anything, Elise. Not an answer, not a dinner, and certainly not a relationship. Elise listened quietly. Now that you have earned every opportunity entirely on your own, I can finally tell you the truth. He smiled with the same kindness she had first noticed on that bench. I admire your character more than your accomplishments. I admire your kindness more than your talent. Somewhere between our conversations about work, books, children learning to read, and improving this company, I realized I was always looking forward to seeing you again. Elise, would you allow me to take you to dinner, not as your chief executive officer, but simply as Declan? Tears gathered gently in her eyes as she laughed through a smile. Do you know what is funny? What? If you had asked me that question the day after I discovered you were my boss, I would have said no. Declan nodded with understanding. I know. She looked around the quiet park before meeting his eyes again. But you never asked until you made certain I would never have to wonder whether my career depended on my answer. It never would, he said softly. I know, she replied. That is why my answer is yes. They shared a quiet embrace beneath the winter sky, grateful not for wealth or titles, but for the journey that had brought them there. Months later, after company policies were carefully followed and appropriate reporting relationships were permanently changed, their relationship became public with the support of the board and their colleagues. Employees smiled because they knew the story behind it. It had never begun with power or status. It had begun with kindness offered to a stranger who simply listened. Whenever new employees asked how Mercer Dynamics became known for treating people with respect, longtime staff members often smiled and pointed toward the park across the street. They would say that the company truly changed the day its leaders stopped talking long enough to listen, and that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with nothing more than an honest conversation on an ordinary bench between two people who had no idea they were about to change each other's lives forever. If Elise and Declan's story reminded you that everyone deserves to be seen, heard, and valued, please like and share this video with someone who needs that message today. Subscribe to Chosen by Love for more emotional stories about courage, second chances, and love that arrives when it is least expected.